It's important for instructors to consider their own safety. Often we're so focused on our participants that we think less about what we're doing and how we're taking good care of ourselves. This presentation deals with using mats on pool decks when instructing aqua fitness classes from the pool deck. We will consider why it's important to have something like a teaching mat when you are teaching from the deck, what kinds of mats work well as tips for how to use your mat, what kind of mat to get. We want to keep you safe while you teach. Mats create safety in the following ways. They prevent slip and fall on wet pool decks. They reduce impact on hard pool decks. And they also provide a teaching focal point. You can almost think of your mat like a podium from which you will speak and teach. What kinds of materials are available and appropriate for deck teaching mats? We find a dense closed cell foam is good. There are also mats out there made of a resilient rubber tire kind of material. The mat needs to be non-slip in that once it is on a wet pool deck, it won't slide when you step on it. Things like yoga mats can look like they would work very well, but they can hydroplane on a wet pool deck. So you step on the mat and it goes sliding. We want mats that are waterproof or water friendly. In other words, they can tolerate being wet, they can dry out and live to serve another day. Your mat needs to be large enough to allow you to move well when you're on it and teach in your style. Other characteristics about mats are, can you easily store and dry them out between uses? Are they easy to transport? In other words, if you're teaching at one location and another, can you take your mat with you from one place to another? Transportation is also important if you have a fair distance to walk from your teaching spot to where the mat will be stored and dried between teaching opportunities. Mats need to be affordable. They need to be something you can find easily, and they need to last a long time. You're investing in this piece of teaching equipment. You work hard for your money, so we want the mat to last well for you. Having a beveled edge on your mat is important to reduce tripping. You don't have just a square edge, it has a sloped edge, so you're less likely to catch your foot when you're stepping back onto the mat. Tips for your teaching mats include the following. First of all, reduce jumping around, even when you have a mat. We teach instructors how to work without putting a huge amount of effort physically into their teaching. You can be energizing, you can be energetic, but you don't have to be a jackrabbit on deck. So we teach instructors how to show jacks and skis without jumping. Those are tricky moves because you are in the water picking both feet up and going from one location to a new location. You can show those moves from a chair, or you can learn how to mark them. You can also show them with your arms so people know what their legs are doing without you having to be airborne. It's important to stay on the mat during vigorous moves. When you're teaching, be on the mat. If you happen to be running, for example, or showing one or two jacks or skis as they would do them in the water. I tend to use my mat as a focal point when I'm teaching. I leave the mat when I'm observing people or coaching. Participants learn that when I leave the mat, I will be observing them and coaching them. When I return to the mat, I will be showing them the move or a new move. If you teach from different locations, it's ideal to have a mat at each spot. For example, you might start your class from the center of the pool and be teaching to both chest deep or shallower water and deep water where people are suspended. If you move back and forth from one end of the pool to the other, it's ideal to have a mat at each teaching location. You want a mat that you can dry out between uses. Especially if you have a foam mat, they can become very soggy, and when they do, they lose their ability to cushion you as well, and they tend to be fragile when they're wet, or at least some of them do. So for example, if you pick up a soggy wet mat by the corner and try to drag it to a different location, sometimes the corner will rip off in your hands. Mats are expensive. You work hard for your money. We want them to last. So you need to have a mat that you can dry out if it's one that does absorb water. You're going to have to consider where you can put mats between classes if you're not using them and they're staying at the pool. Some facilities have an equipment room that would be ideal to place the mat for drying. I find that you're going to want to have something like a sawhorse or a railing in that space so you can hang the mat and let it drip. Sometimes I would find mats positioned over top of other equipment, which is not ideal. So think about where the mat can be stored and how it can be stored between uses. If you have a foam mat, putting the corners of your teaching chair on the mat can damage the mat. If you have a rubber tire type mat, putting your teaching chair on that can make your chair very tippy and inappropriately balanced. Teaching chairs typically are going to be beside or behind your mat, not on them. If you have a hard rubber tire-like mat, then kneeling on that will require you to put down a kneeling pad or a folded towel. They're very hard on the knees. When I'm teaching deep water, sometimes I will show kneeling jacks or kneeling skis in a kneeling alignment myself. So if I'm using a rubber tire mat, I need to protect my knees. As mentioned before, wet foam mats can rip very easily, so you need to transport them carefully. That might mean that you have to roll them up to be able to drag them as a unit, or get somebody to help you move that mat into the storage room. Here are some mat examples for you to consider. The HydroFit mat is excellent. It's a closed, dense foam mat. It's very resilient. It has beveled edges. You can order that mat through hydrofit.com. Amazon carries a number of mats that are designed for wet environments like kitchens. So you will find them under anti-stress mats for wet environments. Some supply companies for industrial locations will have anti-stress, anti-fatigue mats that are designed to be in wet environments. So you may find a mat at an industrial supply company in your area. You can find the rubber tire type mats in a lot of hardware stores. I find them in my Canadian Tire, at my Home Depot, Home Hardware, other places like that carry gardening supplies perhaps, or they carry mats for industrial applications. Wherever you get your mat, you want it to be resilient, affordable, and something you can transport between classes or between locations. The rubber tire mats can leave dark marks on your skin when you're handling them after they've become wet. They can leave dark marks on the floor. As they age, the material can break down somewhat so that it is more prone to leaving marks on you or the surface they're located on. So do be aware of that possibility if you select this type of mat. This is the kind of mat that you can't kneel on without having protection for your knees. So to summarize, here's a mat wish list. You want your mats to be affordable, available to you, and long-lasting. You want the edge to be beveled or sloped so you don't have a sharp edge that will catch your foot when you move laterally onto the mat. You want a closed cell, dense foam that gives you the amount of padding that's going to be ideal for you. Some mats can be very thick and foamy. Those can interfere with your balance. If you have an opportunity to try the mat, that's ideal because you can see whether you're comfortable standing on that mat with one foot, for example, if you're showing a stretch. Sometimes you're going to need your support teaching chair, a railing, or a wall if you have to do a single leg support on your mat because it is dense enough and deep enough that it makes your stance unstable. Be sure your mat can be transported, stored, and dried easily between uses. And be sure your mat is large enough to allow you to teach the way you do comfortably. Good luck finding a mat that suits your needs. We hope you'll take your safety seriously and take good care of you.